Number 10. Pressure to perform. In the Middle Ages, either partner in a marriage was entitled to coitus with their partners under any circumstances. It was called the marriage rite. This went both ways, and unless you were passionately in love with your partner and straight, this could be a nightmare. It was so sacred you could even get it on in a church and the priest would be like, yep, go for it. Failure to perform in the bedroom or anywhere was grounds for divorce, which was a huge deal at the time. Now the first problem here is a lack of consent, but the biggest problem for men who weren't inclined to sleep with their wives was impotency. There was no sympathy for men in these circumstances. If a wife accused her husband of this, then the couple would have to undergo a bedroom trial, where a crowd of wise elders, mainly grandmothers, aunts, and mothers, would watch the couple in their bedroom for 3 nights. If you were rich, this was even worse. These trials would be carried out in public in court. Yeah, that's right. The wife had to prove that the husband couldn't get it up in court. Now he could call on women of the night to prove his prowess, if he was so inclined, but if it was proven that he couldn't, then the couple would be divorced. But the bottom line, the main point of marriage was to have children, and if there weren't any, then this failure was placed heavily on the man. Number 9. Helmeted cock. No. I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about. Think about how much entertainment you consume on a daily basis. You're watching me right now, scrolling on TikTok, Instagram, movies, Netflix, whatever you want to do. The desire for entertainment is strong in humanity, so medieval nobles found ways to insert the funnies into everything they could, even food. Helmeted cock was one such entertaining delicacy that delighted all of the guests behind the castle walls. It was essentially a rooster stitched to a pig and then roasted. Another game they used to play with their food was live frog and chicken. They would put live frogs into pie shells so that when someone cut into it, all these frogs would just ribbit about the dinner table. Hilarity! And then live chicken was significantly darker. They'd pluck a live chicken in boiling water in front of the guests, like in a jacuzzi, and when it passed out, they'd glaze it to look like it was cooked. Then they would lay it on the table, and when the chicken finally came to, it would bound up and down the table to the delight of the guests. This poor chicken who's like frantically being like, where the heck are my feathers? I'm naked! Just awful. Weird times. Weird times. What else were they gonna do? Number 8. The art of dying. To see where I'm going with this, check out this pic. Why does he look so calm? He's literally being stabbed in the head and like the side and everywhere else. While in real life this wouldn't actually happen, you wouldn't be this calm if you were being killed, but this was the goal. People lived in a very pious society back in the medieval ages, and what with death looming around every corner with the Black Plague, you know, they developed a very unique idea about death called ars moriendi, the art of dying. The idea revolved around a good Christian death, that it should be planned and peaceful. I'm going to die on December 16th, blah, 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 whatever date. They didn't actually say that, but anyways. So as medieval people were lying on their deathbed in their castle, they were expected to receive it without despair or any kind of existential crisis. You had to take it honorably, and if you didn't, it was looked down on, but then again, you were also dead, so what does that matter? But it was because of this belief that even in paintings depicting gore and death, the victim, who was stabbed in the head, always had like a calm expression, just like, yeah, this is fine. It's a flesh wound.
Number 7. Being a knight. Being a knight, obviously it sounds cool. They have the sword, they have the horse, the flowing hair, they're saving the damsel in distress, all that jazz that you picture in your head. It actually sucked being a knight, a lot. First of all, chainmail. You know how heavy chainmail is alone? It's like 55 pounds, and that was underneath all of your armor. No way I could climb up on a horse wearing armor or chainmail. My knees would buckle. No thank you. Being a knight is something that starts when you're 7 years old as well. You would be given to a noble to learn for 7 years, and then at age 14, you would become a squire. A knight's intern, not an ideal job to have when you're 14, but okay. But if you stick it out for just 7 more years, then you become a knight. And then you can get your chest blown off jousting. Neat. All that time just to get rocked by another bigger dude on a bigger horse. No, just no for me.
Number 6. Death by anything, but mostly violence. Life in medieval times was considered basically brutal and short. If it wasn't the plague, it was a cold. If it wasn't disease, it was the weather. If it wasn't the weather, it was famine. If it wasn't famine, it was violence everywhere else. It was a damn miracle if you survived childhood. If you had to pick any other time in history to live, like you couldn't live in this one. Taylor asked me this earlier and I had a response, but it definitely wasn't this time. Literally block this time period from your mind. Between 1330 to 1479, men could expect to die 9 years sooner than their female counterparts. The reason was violence against men by other men. But the biggest factor that made especially men's lives so short was the violence, as I mentioned. Think about it. It was men who were often called to war with only their farming tools, or if they were proper soldiers they would have had more, but they were called off to do jobs that literally required them to kill or be killed. Homicide levels in medieval England were around 10 times higher than they are today. This isn't to say at all that women were excluded from this, they were mostly the victims of this violence, but there was a culture around men that expected them to take part in violence to the extreme. From drunken brawls, to duels, to playful sword fights gone wrong, torment, there was a lot going on. Male gangs were responsible for most of the mayhem as they were bolstered with the need to prove themselves. But also, if you were about to get mugged in an alleyway and somebody wanted to fight you, which was very likely because everyone was on edge, it was good to have backup. Number 5. Shotgun weddings. Behind the closed doors of the castle walls, love lives were pretty much what you would expect them to be. Really stinky, and also not about love. Marriage was politically motivated and there wasn't room for much love there. Women had essentially no say, and both boys and girls could be married as soon as 12 to 14. However, compared to today, their ceremonies would be better compared to a shotgun wedding in Vegas than the ones we know. It would be completed in a matter of moments just by simply uttering consent. You could marry technically in the street, or at dinner, or at a pub, or in bed after the deed is done. So because things got so confusing by the 12th century, marriage got more complicated. It was declared a holy sacrament that must be observed by God. Observed being the key word. Not only did people actually have to see people saying I do, they had to see them do the deed. The bride was carried to the bed by the family and they would wait around until the act was complete, so you know what I mean. If you were lucky enough to live in a castle, you might have had bed curtains to shield the viewing, but they still heard everything that was going on. Number 4. The Crusades. Just imagine this. Thick, heavy metal armor reflecting the heat from the sun back against you as you chug along the desert. Despite being in the Holy Land, this certainly sounds like hell. As I mentioned earlier, men were expected to go to war when called, even if they had no training or skill and like maybe knew how to use a toothpick but had no idea what a sword was. For many, it was a death sentence, and the first Crusades were particularly brutal because you weren't only being called to war because of, you know, honor, but you were being called to war because it was a religious thing. Getting there was awful in the first place, you might not even make the voyage. Then marches through the desert were long and hot, with soldiers constantly at odds with starvation, dehydration, disease, infection, the elements, and then of course a spontaneous attack from the enemy. So like you're exhausted and all of a sudden you have to be like fighting somebody to save your life. There are even stories of some of them boiling shoe leather to eat it because they had nothing else. And after what we know of tanning, many crusaders justified their suffering as a part of the spiritual journey, so if you did fall ill to disease, you were just kinda left by the side of the road to die alone. Number 2, the executioner. A man named Franz Schmidt meticulously chronicled his life as an executioner in detail, and well, as you can guess, it's not a fun one, but there was a lot of humanity behind it too. He had to start practicing on pumpkins at first, then graduate to live animals, and then humans. Who would choose a role like this? Well, though legally the role wasn't hereditary, it pretty much was by expectation and blood. The job was passed from eldest son to eldest son, with other sons being trained to fill vacancies. Daughters of executioners married sons of executioners, so the position would continue. As most people saw this as a pretty undesirable profession, it was difficult to keep anyone at their posts, so the job fell to the men who inherited the axe, as it were. So not legally, but it was. This cycle of executioners created something called executioner dynasties across Europe. The existence of these dynasties meant that men were trapped in this cycle of employment and had few other opportunities to work. It also meant you had a very lonely life, as people who associated with death weren't people anyone liked to hang around.
And number 1, the gong farmer. The gong farmer, of course we had to end on this one, as it's definitely the most crappy of the list. Medieval washrooms are just horrible. They're not really a thing. They didn't have the sanitation techniques that we have today. Stuff would often pile up within the castle walls, and over time it would smell worse and worse. You can only imagine. The rat trapper would be around this area too, I'm assuming. So maybe they would see each other and fist bump and be like, hey, our jobs suck, nice, let's do it, get that bread. So these respected gong farmers, they would come in and take the bad stuff away from the castle. They were crap commuters, essentially. These cesspits were usually in the bottom of the castle, the lowest level, because you know how gravity and things work. These guys would go in and dig through years of yuck, piles of it, just moving all day long back and forth out of the castle. They too were paid well, really well obviously, but a lot of these gong farmers got sick. A good number of them just wouldn't come out of those pits. Pretty horrible, right? And on top of that, people didn't like talking to them. Their job wasn't cool like the guy who takes heads. Head and shoulders also didn't exist back then. They didn't smell the best. They were often just kind of and they cross the street. It was sad. It was all bad. Hashtag all bad. Kicking off the list at number 10, Plague Body Collector. Immediately into the dark and dirty. Here we go. We're not wasting any time today. Plague body collectors were vital back in the 14th century when bodies were quite literally starting to pile up. Somebody had to go in and somebody had to move them. That's pretty much this entire list. Somebody had to do it. So using an old cart and a dirty rag only, they would have to carry plague-ridden corpses 28 city blocks away. Great job, we love it. They would also cover the bodies in flowers to prevent disease, or so they thought. Yes, this tulip ought to prevent the plague. Number 9, Beastly Justice. I figured I would put a lighthearted one on this list. This actually made me laugh while I was researching it. Beastly Justice was when animals had to go to court. They were also put on trial, like a full trial. It's wild to look back at a night and the things they had to do for their kings and queens, but the fact that they also had to get up early and attend these courts, royal courts, where a wild animal was taking the stand. And it actually happened in history. That's what happened after an animal runs through town. It would attack people, being confused and all, as most animals are, but the townsfolk would actually believe that the devil was involved in this animal's scheme. Like these animals worked for Big Red himself. In 1457, villagers in France had to deal with 6 pigs who ran wild and attacked locals. They did a lot of damage, so instead of just putting the animals down or setting them free, away from your town, they took them to a real trial. There was a judge, a couple prosecutors, 8 witnesses, a defense attorney for the pigs, which I gotta say, we should do a list just on that person alone. What a weird job. These pigs were hung from a gallows tree. A knight had to formally hang pigs after a trial was concluded. The 1400s were a wild time. Your Honor, due to my client being a pig,
Number 8, a tanner. Even for a medieval peasant who never washed or cleaned themselves and literally lived in filth, this was a dirty job. Women were more commonly found in household chores or as milkmaids, barmaids, weavers, artisans, and tenant farmers. This job may have fallen mostly to men, and it was a rough one. I'll tell you. Men would rather go to war than do this job. You had to get skins from a butcher, along with the grime that covered it, which was mostly manure and blood. Then you had to trim the skins and get rid of all the hair. To do this, they had to let the hair follicles rot by sprinkling it with urine or soak it in a wood, ash, and lime solution. Can you tell which one was cheaper? Then they'd scrape off the hair and any skin before washing it again in pigeon droppings or dog poo to remove the lime and make it softer and more flexible. Or the craftsman might use fermented barley or rye with stale beer or urine, again, as an additive. This could take up to 3 months. 3 months plus longer as there was more rinsing and stretching until it could be used. Leather was a crucial resource, so though dirty, it was a really necessary job, but oh my god. No thank you. Number 7. A jester versus Netflix. As soon as I said jester, you pictured a tight-wearing, colorful bard with a stupid hat. Probably not far off, but the nobles had to entertain themselves somehow, as previously mentioned. The castle would play host to loads of minstrels, jugglers, and acrobats. Edward II, for instance, in 1306 had hundreds at his knighting celebration. But the original meaning of the jester was just simply a good storyteller. They would wander in on dark evenings and entertain the company with fancy tales, comedic and dramatic. But soon jesters became employed full-time to kings and lords. Henry II had one called Roland the Musical Farter. Great name. I wonder what he did. Every Christmas he would perform and earn a grant of the land, so they were paid pretty well. They had to be wise and quick-witted in order to maintain the love of their masters. However, if they went too far, off with their head. Triboulet, the king of France's fool, once went too far and was sentenced to execution, but he got out of it when they allowed him to choose how he would die. He simply said, old age, and he was pardoned. Again, quick-witted. Number 6, gazing out of windows. Imagining a world where women are restricted from education, business autonomy is thankfully getting harder and harder to do. But even without feminism, women still operated within the constraints of a patriarchal society in very important ways. It was their job to run the entire castle when the lord was away, for instance. They weren't just staring out windows, waiting to lower their hair for a handsome suitor. Medieval noblewomen, for instance, had the responsibility of running the household and enforcing it. Lords were often away on crusades, war, court, or even just dead. So it was up to the ladies to run the estate, finances, and even to defend the castle against attack. Also, if the husband was dead, many women would choose not to remarry because you had more advantages being a widow than being married. You would essentially be treated as a man, especially in terms of property and things like that. Religion was also incredibly important, and one of the restrictions for women at the time was that they were forbidden from touching the altar. So in order to metaphorically dance around this, they donated their clothes to the church, which would eventually be worn by the clergyman, hence they would eventually touch the altar. A very clever way of getting around this rule, but more research needs to be done about women in the medieval ages, but this is kind of what it looked like.
Number 5, rat catcher. As the name hints towards, rat catchers are one of the worst jobs you can have in and around a castle. It's an important role, of course, like being a fool or a literal walking talking toilet, which I'll get into later, but there needs to be a chasseur de rats. Chasseur de rats. I'm just gonna start calling myself that. Back in those times, rats and mice were the leading source of spreading disease. They didn't have city buses or, people walking around throwing bottles, and with these castles being big and dark, they were probably full of rats. Black rats were a common household problem, yuck, so in comes the well-respected rat catcher. These guys would sometimes try and use spells to get rid of rats. Wouldn't work really too well, but more often than not, that didn't work, so poison powders were the main trick of the trade. The most famous you probably heard of is the Pied Piper. He visited Germany, he arrived in this small town, and rumor has it this guy used a flute to drive all the rats just into the river. He does a musical performance and then exterminates all of your pests. If anything, he should be getting a bonus, but rather the town insists they weren't even gonna pay him, so he used his flute to make everybody just go away and leave the town forever. What an OG. He's like, you don't wanna pay me? No sweat. Number 4, a scribe. Scribes would copy text, something that would take months, right? It would be a horrible job. My wrist hurts sometimes filling out my name. I'm like, oh, I haven't done this in years. You ever read the terms and conditions to an iPhone? Imagine life before copy and paste. You had to write that out. It was a process. I mean, first you had to convince somebody to let you, borrow their codex. Yeah, people don't trust me with their phone chargers, let alone their codex. Okay. You take that for months at a time, of course at a high cost, a lot of trust there, because many didn't know how to write, and to be fair, if I magically got transported back to the Middle Ages, they wouldn't be able to read my chicken scratch at all. Also ink? Good luck, no way. I cannot do it. I'm barely figuring out pens today. If you dabbled in calligraphy, this was the job for you, but again, it wasn't an easy job. Imagine trying to write out the speech of a drunken king. You're like, did he say wither or thither? This guy's asleep. Number 3, lector. Long before Spotify or even before the miracle worker herself, that is LimeWire, may she rest in peace, couldn't have grown up without her, factory workers needed entertainment to distract themselves from the repetitive, horrible tasks all day long. I mean, we're talking about a time where women were making arsenic dresses for a living. This was long before the labor board ever existed, right? It was all bad. It's 1929, workers are treated like complete trash, so they decide to liven up the workday by bringing in a lector. A lector would read the news or literature out loud to workers all day long, every single day. Out loud, with bad breath. It sounds like a nice gesture on paper, but in reality, factory workers were then forced to pitch in portions of their own pay in order to fund these guys. Yeah, they would have to make less money to hear Schmo Rogan talk about politics all day. That's horrible. Not everybody was on board here, so naturally thousands of workers ended up going on strike because, this guy wouldn't shut up. I mean, some cases, sure, entertain away, but if you need to focus all day long, maybe you're using small parts, maybe you're repairing a watch or two, it's kind of hard to get your job done when dude's in the corner trying to figure out commas, you know what I mean? He's like, and I'll huff, and I'll puff, and what's this word? You're like, guy, I'm trying to make an arsenic watch. Please shut up.
And And last but not least, the Tower of London Zoo. The Tower of London has seen a lot of action since it was built by William the Conqueror in the 1070s. It has housed some of history's most famous political prisoners, but did you know that at one time it was kind of a zoo? From the 1200s to 1835, the tower housed an exotic assortment of wild animals. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my, but also elephants, monkeys, and polar bears. They were brought to the castle as gifts, and if you visit the attraction now, there are wire sculptures commemorating the beasts. In 1235, Henry III was given leopards, though most likely they were lions, but they were just called that, by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, and that's where it all began. The king decided to start a zoo at the tower, and that he did. A polar bear joined the exhibit in 1252, and then an African elephant in 1255. A special enclosure was built, but sadly the elephant died only a couple years later, which was sadly the fate of most of the animals, except for the lions. They did pretty well. Okay, number 10. Location, location, location. So first off, let's begin at the very foundation as to why medieval castles were built in the first place. And the biggest hint lies in where they were built. From the 11th century onwards, medieval castles were built for a few reasons. 1. To demonstrate wealth. 2. Provide a place of defense and retreat. And thirdly, to defend important passageways and landways. Oh, and it was a nice place to live. But specifically because of the last few reasons, where a castle was built really mattered. Some were built by the sea to have a strong advantage over naval attacks, or they were built on hilltops just like you see in the movies. The more they could see, the better the chance they had of anticipating the enemy's attack. But even still, some castles took this idea to the extreme, such as Castle Monte Titano, which literally looks like it's about to fall off of a cliff any moment, or Przemyśl Castle, which was built into the side of a cliff face and is only partially visible from the outside. This would definitely make it difficult for anyone to attack the fortress given the rough terrain, but still, like, how did they even build that? How did you even build it? I don't even know. Just the talent, pure talent.
Number 9. Galley rower. My arms are tired just thinking about this job. Here we go, I gotta warm up. Back in the Middle Ages, if you were assigned to work on a galley, well, you better hope you were below deck scrubbing something with someone. Some sort of swashbuckler, something, I don't know, I've seen Pirates of the Caribbean once. If you were a galley rower, you would be tired all day long. Some large vessels had around 1,000 crewmen. This was now a faster and more fierce way than any sail, but you needed a bicep or two, right? Benjamin Arbel, author of A Companion to Venetian History, states that back in the 1400s, a galley rower was one of the most detested obligations among Venice's colonial subjects. Yeah, obviously, they would do anything they could to avoid this position, which would sometimes include becoming a priest. Yeah, rowing a boat or Jesus, what's easier? They're like, Jesus, definitely Jesus. I don't blame them, I would hate that job as well. These noodles right here, this wouldn't do any good for any army. I'll complain about my arms being tired while in a paddle boat. You know what I mean? Think about that one. Number 8, cupbearer. One of the most important roles in the castle, of course, belongs to the cupbearer. I have a Yeti, also quite important. Yeah, these guys don't just sit in the corner and play the cup song on repeat, although that would be amazing. We're like, yes, more of that. This is the first piece of music we've ever had. No, they would serve royalty their drinks. They were responsible for making sure nobody has tampered with any cup. This was a noble spot to have. The king really needs to trust their cupbearer, obviously. The best part of this position was also the most dangerous. See, cupbearers were responsible for tasting the king's beverage each and every time. You know, to make sure there wasn't any poison. That's horrible. It's kind of good though, I don't know. By the time dinner was over, Buddy probably had no idea which way was up. He's like, here you go, it's safe, and then immediately faints. Number 7, resurrectionalist. Yeah, you don't see a lot of these guys around anymore, eh? Wonder why, that's odd. A resurrectionalist is exactly what it sounds like. It's absolutely disgusting, and dare I say, a bit of hogwash. These guys were responsible for digging up dead bodies, and then they would sell them to medical schools. All in the name of science. Gross, disgusting science. This was in the late 1820s, and at this time in Edinburgh, Scotland, the medical science community was on the up and up because of these guys. But in order to study new medicines to, you know, avoid the next plague, they needed to get dirty. I'll tell you what they didn't need though. They didn't need William Burke and William Hare. See, these two Irish brothers, they were both resurrectionalists who were running out of patience and money. So they themselves would end up taking people out and then proceed to sell their corpses right after. They did this 17 times. They killed 17 people all in the course of 2 years. Then they sold their corpses to one Dr. Robert Knox. Yeah, it took 17 killings before somebody caught on to the system of theirs. Hare testified against Burke, so Burke got the old gallows treatment and was publicly dissected. His skeleton is actually, hilariously enough, still on display at the Edinburgh Medical College Museum to this day. So if you want to go flip off a skeleton, there you go. Number 6, fullers. Ancient Romans were pretty creative, dare I say. That's what we'll say about that. Recently we did a list on dark medical practices used in history, and in that list we talked briefly about how urine was used by ancient Romans to, whiten their smile. We love that. Fresh breath guaranteed. They also used urine to wash their clothes. They didn't use soap because the amount of ammonia in your pee often did the trick. Again, creative. Lye was also used to clean clothes at this time, but it was pricey, so plan B was to head down to the old laundromat and then hand your dirties over to a fuller. Yeah, these lucky lads would have to stand in a tub filled with chemicals, water, and, well, yes, lots of urine, and then just stomp. Just stomp and scrub for hours. Urine collected from all over town. How lucky is that guy? And of course, most of the time, they would get extremely ill. Obviously, just breathing that in. From one of the many poisons that they're splashing around in, that'd be the worst job. Ugh, this should have been number 1, but it's not. Trust me, it's not. Number 5, ewerer. Ah yes, the ewerer. That's a easy word to say right there. Ewerer. Ewerer. While water carriers were responsible for carrying fresh water supplies throughout town, the ewerer was responsible for nobles and their water supply. Yeah, see, these lucky lads had the misfortune of transporting boiling hot water. For tea, hand washing, a hot bath, you name it, all that nice stuff. Anything you desire that requires boiling hot water from all the way across town, well, the calm ewerer has your back. What a stressful job. Uneven stone roads, good luck not spilling all over yourself.
Number 4, the mystery of Ludlow Castle. Beyond weird weddings, war, and strange food performances, castles contain secrets behind their walls we may never know, such as the mystery of the White Lady of Ludlow Castle. In the 12th century, the castle was home to Marion de la Bruyere, and she had a secret. She was in love with a secret suitor with whom she would sneak into the castle each night. She would lower a rope in true Rapunzel fashion to bring her love to her. But little did she know that her mysterious love was setting a trap for her. One night he left the rope below so that more men could follow up behind him and take the castle. Bereft and betrayed, Marion stabbed her lover with his own sword. She then flung herself from the castle's walls and perished on the rocks below. To this day, people have stories of seeing a woman's white figure tumbling from the castle window, trapped in the desperate circumstances of her death. Number 3, secret passageways. If I am ever in my life able to actually afford a house, we'll see. One of the ride or die requirements is a secret passageway or to a secret library. Like both. Both would be great, but a secret library is a must. And I will never tell anyone about it because how cool would it be if they found it themselves? Medieval castles were filled with secret passageways and alcoves designed to help facilitate escape should the need arise. In fact, it was kind of a requirement of fortifications to have one. The main secret entrance was called the postern. It was small, therefore easy to defend and protected by metal grates, as well as there were battlements above it. However, the entrance could be exploited if in the wrong hands. Say you have some double crossers behind your walls. They could help sneak in the enemy soldiers, such as the case of Corfe Castle during the siege of 1645. An officer named Colonel Pittman helped aid enemy troops in through the postern, condemning the fate of the fort.
Number 2, watching paint dry. Before we get to our big bad number 1, I have to include this modern curveball. I can't believe this is a real job. This is hilarious. There's a man in his late 30s right now named Dr. Thomas Kerwin. Sorry, he's not a man. He's a doctor. A doctor who makes a living by watching paint dry. Yes, this man currently works for Dulux Paint, and he studies paint under a microscope and also as it paints on a wall. He has to time it. This makes sense. When fast drying paint is a main selling point, somebody, again, needs to do this job. Somebody's got to figure that out, right? And that somebody here is Dr. Thomas Kerwin. What a champ, that's amazing. When asked about his profession on catersnews.com, Dr. Thomas replied, "People think I stare at walls, constantly checking my watch, i.e. me, to time how long it takes. If that was the case, I would be bored out of my mind. Fortunately, when you look under a microscope, it brings everything to life. A liter of paint consists of 1,000,000 billion particles. So there's plenty to see before the paint even hits the wall." 1,000,000 billion, that sounds like it's made up. Yeah, there's 1,000,000 billion particles in this paint. $26.99 a can. Here you go. Look at this green. We actually painted this with Dulux green. It was great. You wouldn't even guess. Number 1, groom of the stool. Nowadays, higher ups in the office, they have assistants grab your coffee for you. Maybe they answer some phone calls, keep the business running while you're off golfing, doing stuff that matters. Assistants are vital. The groom of the stool though, that's a bit much. That was a bit too close for me, I think. We have some labor laws put in place now. I don't think we're gonna see an online job opening for a groom of the stool, but you never know. I will definitely apply, let's do it. Back in the Dark Ages, this role again was vital and respected. It was created by King Henry VIII, and this role was to assist the king, specifically assist his bowel movements. Grooms of the stool had a box that they carried with them at all times, and that's where the magic happened. The dark magic, that is. And you would literally follow the king until he needed you. Porta potties weren't a thing at this time, and there's no way you're gonna catch a king squatting in the woods behind a bush. You're not gonna catch King Henry VIII like, hey, don't look, do you have any leaves? No, not at all. In fact, you wouldn't even catch a king wiping his own behind. That chore was also reserved for said groom of the stool. Yeah, lucky you, right? Yuck. In this stool, you would have water, hopefully, towels, a wash bowl, the whole setup. You're probably thinking, Taylor, which poor soul had to be stuck with this role? A prisoner? Somebody who lost their sense of smell? Sight, hopefully, everything? Nope. Only sons of noblemen could take on this role, and in doing so, they also gain access to every single room in the castle, and tons of clothes, and any bedchamber, furnishings, anything they want, and of course, a higher pay.